The storm hit Cedar Bay like a roar from the deep. Inside the floating house, Michael Reed wiped soot from an old boiler and found a hidden chamber filled with war bonds, love letters, and a secret that could change everything. But as thunder rolled and footsteps creaked above, Rex, his loyal German shepherd, was already growling in the dark. Before it gets started, please take a few seconds to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, where are you watching tonight? So, Chapter 1. The Floating House and the Bronze Key. The lake was quiet beneath a thin layer of morning fog, the kind that seemed to blur the line between water and sky. Cedar Bay stretched wide and still, its surface a mirror of pale gray light. Michael Reed stood at the edge of the worn dock, his hands shoved into the deep pockets of his jacket, the cold biting at his knuckles. His breath rose in faint clouds, vanishing into the mist. Behind him, his old pickup coughed once and went silent, as if to say it too had grown tired of running. Michael was 60, but his frame still carried the strength of a man used to lifting crates and steel beams. His back was straight, though time had etched tiredness into his shoulders. A week's worth of gray stubble shadowed his jaw, and his hair, once the color of dark sand, had surrendered to silver. He had worked his whole life in warehouses, until the company cut non-essential labor. He had smiled politely as they handed him the paper, then gone home and poured coffee into a chipped mug that still bore his late wife's lipstick stain. He hadn't thrown it away. Beside him sat Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with alert amber eyes and a coat of thick sable fur that shimmered under the thin light. Rex was strong and disciplined, but gentle, the kind of dog who would guard a child's toy as carefully as a bone. He had been Michael's companion since the day his wife, Grace, passed away. The dog had found Michael by chance, a rescue from a construction site accident, and the two had never parted since. Where Michael's words ended, Rex's quiet loyalty continued. Now they stood before what was supposed to be a houseboat, left to Michael by his late uncle, Harold Reed, a man he barely remembered from childhood. The letter from the lawyer had said, "To my nephew, I leave the home that taught me peace." The phrase had puzzled him. Michael had imagined a small cabin or an old fishing shack. Instead, before him floated a tired house, its paint peeling like autumn bark, its windows clouded with age. Yet as the fog thinned, sunlight spilled through the gray, and the little house seemed to glow faintly, as if breathing with the rhythm of the lake. "Looks like she's got a soul, huh, boy?" Michael muttered. Rex's ears perked up, tail sweeping the dock in agreement. They crossed the wooden planks carefully. The boards creaked under their weight, the sound echoing softly across the water. Michael unlocked the rusted latch, the hinges groaning like old men complaining about their bones. Inside, the air smelled of salt and oil and something faintly sweet, lavender maybe, or the memory of it. Dust drifted in the sunlight like slow snow. He ran his hand along a table, his fingers tracing initials carved into the wood. H.R. "Uncle Harold," he whispered. "You really lived in this thing?" Rex sniffed the corners, tail twitching, his nose catching the scent of old leather and fish. Michael walked slowly from room to room. The living area was small but tidy. The furniture, though aged, looked well cared for. On the wall hung a faded nautical chart. The paper curled at its edges, showing the lake and its small islands. A clock on the shelf had long stopped ticking. Michael sat on a chair and rubbed his temples. He had nowhere else to go, no yet waiting, and no one expecting him. The thought stung at first, but then, oddly, it felt freeing. The water outside lapped gently against the hull, and he realized how strange it was to feel calm for the first time in months. By afternoon, the fog had burned off, and Cedar Bay revealed its soft blues and greens. Michael decided to visit the small town that bordered the lake to buy supplies, some canned food, nails, and maybe oil for the generator. The town was quiet, a few people sitting on porches, watching the lake as if time didn't bother to chase them anymore. At the corner of Main Street stood Evelyn Brooks's diner, a tiny building with red shutters and the smell of baked apples floating out the window. Evelyn herself stood behind the counter when he walked in. She was in her mid-50s, with kind hazel eyes and auburn hair streaked with silver, tied in a loose braid. Her face had the warmth of someone who had smiled through hardship and come out softer, not bitter. She wore a faded blue apron, dusted with flour, and had the air of someone who'd seen everyone's story and served them coffee anyway. "You must be new here," she said, her voice low and pleasant. "We don't get many strangers unless they're lost or looking for the fish market." Maybe a little of both, Michael replied. He introduced himself, and she nodded thoughtfully. Reed, huh? You're Harold's nephew. He used to sit in that corner every Thursday morning, ordered pie before coffee, said dessert gave him patience. Michael smiled faintly. Didn't know him that well. Guess I'm about to learn. Evelyn poured coffee into a mug, sliding it to him. Well, if you're staying out by the bay, you'll need a lot of patience. That house of his creaks louder than the church bell in winter. They both laughed softly. Rex, waiting outside by the window, pressed his nose to the glass. Evelyn looked over and smiled. That your partner? Yeah, Rex, smarter than I am. She wiped her hands on her apron. Then you'll be just fine out there. When Michael returned to the houseboat, dusk was painting the water in gold and violet. The air smelled of pine and distance. He carried a bag of groceries, a few tools, and a pie wrapped in paper. Evelyn had insisted he take it for luck. He sat by the window as Rex curled beside him, tail thumping quietly. As he studied the lake map again, the sunlight caught the frame just right, glinting off a hidden edge. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. He stood, patted over, and pawed at the map. The frame tilted, forward and fell, clattering against the wooden floor. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a bronze key, old and ornate, with waves carved along its spine. Michael picked it up, turning it in the fading light. Looks like the old man left us a mystery, he murmured. Rex tilted his head, eyes sharp, as if he understood. Outside, the lake rippled once, then went still again, unnaturally still. Michael glanced out the window. For just a second, he thought he saw a shadow move beneath the water, long and slow, like something ancient turning in its sleep. He blinked, and it was gone. He looked back at the key, the metal warm in his hand despite the chill in the air. Well, boy, he said softly, I guess we found our first secret. But deep down, something told him this wasn't the kind of secret meant to stay quiet. Chapter 2. The Map, the Relic, and the Calloused Hands. By morning, the fog had thinned into soft threads that drifted above Cedar Bay like forgotten smoke. The floating house creaked with each slow wave, its wooden frame sighing as if it were stretching old bones after a long sleep. Michael Reed woke to that sound, the gentle rhythm of water tapping against the hull. And for the first time in years, he didn't wake to the roar of trucks or the shout of foremen. It was quiet, almost too quiet. He sat up, rubbing the ache from his shoulder, and Rex lifted his head from where he slept near the stove. The dog's ears perked instantly, his tail thumping once against the floorboards, soft and rhythmic. Michael smiled faintly. Morning, partner, he said, his voice rough from sleep. Rex stretched, yawned, and padded to the door, nose twitching toward the scent of the lake. The air inside the houseboat was thick with the smell of damp wood and old machine oil. Dust had settled over everything like a memory, refusing to leave. Michael boiled coffee on the small propane stove, the bitter steam curling into the rafters, and studied the bronze key again under the morning light. The metal gleamed softly, its carved waves shimmering as if alive. You're older than me, aren't you? He muttered. Rex tilted his head as though answering yes. Michael spent most of the morning exploring every corner of the houseboat. He found a chest of tools, rusted pliers, old rope, a hammer whose handle was worn smooth by time. Beneath a pile of yellowed newspapers, he discovered a naval logbook. The cover was cracked leather, the initials HR pressed faintly into it. Inside were pages filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. His uncle had written dates, weather notes, and sketches of islands scattered across Cedar Bay. On the last few pages, the handwriting grew shaky, the words trailing off into fragments. The sound beneath the water. The key turns only when the lake breathes. Michael frowned. The lake breathes. What the hell does that mean? Rex barked once, as if reminding him the answer wouldn't come from talking to paper. Michael smiled, shaking his head. You're probably right, boy. As he moved to stow the logbook away, Rex began to sniff aggressively near the stove, tail wagging. What is it, huh? The dog pawed at the wooden floorboards, then sat back and whined softly. Michael knelt and ran his hands over the boards. One felt looser than the others. With the back of his hammer, he pried it up, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside lay a velvet pouch, its drawstring frayed. He lifted it carefully and poured the contents into his calloused palm. 3 silver coins, darkened with age, and a folded piece of paper. The note was short, written in his uncle's unmistakable scrawl. The heart of the water lies where the iron breathes. Michael frowned. The words felt like a riddle, something out of a sailor's tale. He turned the coins over. One bore the year 1927. Another had an engraving of an anchor wrapped in vines. He thought of his uncle, how the man had lived alone for decades, quietly, secretly. "You were up to something," he whispered. That afternoon he began the work of repairing the roof. It was slow, tiring labor, but Michael's hands remembered the rhythm of effort. He sanded planks, patched cracks, and replaced worn ropes that tethered the houseboat to the dock. Rex sat nearby, watching every move like an apprentice foreman. The sun glared off the water, and sweat traced clean lines through the dust on Michael's arms. His palms, hardened by years of lifting crates, still found comfort in the ache of work. By late afternoon, the sound of an approaching boat echoed across the bay. He looked up to see a small red skiff gliding toward him. At the helm stood Evelyn Brooks, her auburn hair pulled back beneath a blue kerchief, the breeze tugging strands loose. She wore a light jacket and carried a basket that she balanced with care. "I thought you might not remember to eat," she called as she neared. Michael grinned. "You spying on me now? Only enough to make sure you don't sink that thing." She tossed the rope, and he caught it easily, tying it to a cleat. Evelyn climbed aboard with practiced grace. Up close, Michael could see faint laugh lines around her eyes and the way her hands bore tiny scars from years in a hot kitchen. She handed him the basket. "Chicken stew, fresh bread, and before you ask, yes, it's on the house. You're making this a habit," he said, though his stomach growled in betrayal. She shrugged, her eyes bright with humor. "Maybe I just like feeding stubborn men who think instant noodles count as a balanced diet." Rex sniffed eagerly at the basket, tail wagging. Evelyn reached down to scratch behind his ears. "And you must be the real boss here," Michael chuckled. "He sure thinks so." As they ate, the lake shimmered under the sinking sun. Evelyn leaned back, gazing toward the horizon. "You know," she said softly, "your uncle used to say the lake kept secrets. He believed there were things buried down there. Ships, treasures, even regrets." Michael swallowed his mouthful slowly. "He left me a riddle, something about the heart of the water." Evelyn's brow furrowed. "Sounds like Harold. Always loved his mysteries." Then she smiled. "So, what's your plan, Captain?" He gestured to the patched roof and the freshly tied ropes. "For now, keep this old boat from falling apart." Evelyn laughed, her voice warm. "You're fixing it, but it's fixing you too, you know." He looked at her, surprised by how easily she'd read him. "Maybe," he admitted. "Feels good to use my hands again." As the sun dipped lower, Evelyn stood. "You'll figure out that riddle. Just don't fall in while you're thinking." She winked, then climbed back into her skiff. Rex barked once in farewell. Michael watched her go until she disappeared around the bend of the bay, her laughter still floating faintly over the water. When night came, the air grew cool. Michael sat at the small table with a lantern burning low. He spread the map from his uncle's logbook across the wood, tracing the marked points with a pencil. Circles dotted the edges of the bay, each labeled with faint coordinates. One spot near the northern shore was marked with a crude drawing of an anchor. "Iron," he thought. "Iron breathes." Rex stirred, letting out a low whine. The dog's gaze fixed on the corner, where the loose floorboard had been. Michael followed his stare, frowning. "What is it now?" He knelt and lifted the plank again, shining his lantern into the hollow. The light flickered across something metallic, something he hadn't seen before. He reached in and pulled out a small tin box, its surface rough with rust. Inside were photographs, black and white images of men standing beside an old steamboat. The name on the hull read, "The Hesper." One photo showed a younger Harold Reed, smiling with a group of crewmen, holding what looked like the same bronze key now sitting on Michael's table. Beneath the photos lay a thin notebook wrapped in oilcloth. He opened it and read the first line. "If anyone finds this, follow the breath of the iron." Outside, a sudden gust rattled the windows. The lamp flame flickered. The sound of the lake shifted, no longer the soft lap of waves, but a deep, resonant hum, as if something vast stirred below the surface. Rex stood, ears erect, muscles tense. Michael froze, the hairs on his arms rising. The sound faded, leaving only the faint creak of the boat and the whisper of wind. He looked down at the notebook, then at Rex. "I think the lake just breathed, boy," he whispered. Chapter 3. The Storm and the Men Who Wanted to Own the Lake. The next morning broke with a heavy sky, the kind that pressed low and gray over Cedar Bay as if the clouds themselves were listening. Michael Reed woke to the uneasy rocking of the floating house. The air was thick, metallic, carrying the scent of coming rain. Rex stood by the window, fur bristling slightly, his gaze fixed on the far side of the lake where thunder murmured like something waking from sleep. Michael rubbed his stiff shoulder, uneasy himself. "Yeah," he muttered to Rex, "it's coming." He had spent the night poring over the notebook found in the tin box. Between notes about the steamboat, the Hesper, and the lake's depth, there was a sketch, a crude drawing of a cylindrical structure half submerged near the northern inlet. Scribbled beneath it were the words, "Iron lungs, keeper of the heart." Michael had studied it until the lantern sputtered out. Now, as the sky grew darker, he suspected he finally understood. "Iron lungs," he whispered. "The old buoy, the one Harold used to talk about." He packed a small bag, rope, flashlight, gloves, and slipped the bronze key into his pocket. Rex followed, tail low but determined. The lake was no longer still. The surface rippled with warning. As they pushed off in the old rowboat, wind caught the edge of Michael's jacket and whipped it around him like a flag of defiance. Halfway across the bay, another sound rose, a faint engine hum. Michael turned and saw a sleek motorboat cutting through the gray water. Two men stood aboard. The one steering was Roy Haskins, a thick-set man in his late 40s, with a sunburned neck, a crooked nose, and eyes as narrow as a hawk's. Years of working on the docks had left his hands knotted and his temper short. His partner, Cal Parker, was younger, maybe 35, tall and wiry, his dark hair slicked back beneath a cap. Cal had the look of a man who'd once dreamed big, but lost too many bets. Michael recognized them both from town. Haskins had once worked for his uncle's marina before being fired for stealing fuel. Cal was rumored to run odd jobs for Mr. Dalton, a real estate developer who had bought most of the land around Cedar Bay. Dalton was in his late 50s, wealthy, with perfect suits and a politician's smile, but locals whispered he had a habit of acquiring properties through intimidation. Michael's stomach tightened. Word must have gotten out about the hidden treasure. He had shown the coins to no one, but gossip in small towns spread faster than the wind over open water. Rex barked sharply. The motorboat accelerated, sending spray into the air. Haskins cupped his hands and shouted, "Mornin', Reed! Mind if we ask what you're doing all the way out here?" Michael didn't answer. He rowed harder, muscles straining. The waves slapped against the hull, and thunder rolled closer, deep and resonant. "Don't be stubborn," Cal's voice cut across the water. "Dalton just wants a look at what your uncle left behind." Michael's jaw clenched. "Then he can ask me himself." Haskins grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "He tried. You weren't home." The sky cracked open with lightning. The wind howled suddenly, sending the boat tilting. Rex barked again, his hackles raised. Rain began in thick, cold sheets, blurring the horizon into a wall of silver. The waves lifted and dropped them in nauseating rhythm. Michael could barely see the iron buoy ahead, a massive, rust-eaten cylinder rising from the churning water like the spine of some ancient creature. "There!" he shouted over the storm. "That's it!" Rex whined, uneasy but obedient. The little boat rocked violently as Michael grabbed the buoy's ladder. Its metal was slick and corroded, the color of blood turned to ash. He tied the rope to a rung and steadied himself. The bronze key trembled in his hand, slick with rain. He found a keyhole near the base, half hidden under layers of rust. He inserted the key, but it wouldn't turn. The salt and age had sealed it tight. Behind him, the motorboat drew closer, cutting through the waves like a predator. Haskins shouted, "Give it up, Reed! Whatever's there belongs to Dalton now." Michael ignored him, gripping the key with both hands. He twisted. Nothing. His shoulders burned. The buoy groaned under the strain of the waves. Then, over the wind, he heard a splash. Cal shouted, "Roy, he's overboard!" Michael turned. Haskins had lost his footing, thrown into the freezing water. For a moment, Michael hesitated. He could leave him. The storm could take care of what greed had started. But something deep inside, the part of him that had spent years pulling fallen crates off injured co-workers, wouldn't allow it. He tossed the rope. "Grab it!" Haskins surfaced, coughing and panicked, thrashing in the dark water. Michael braced himself and pulled, the muscles in his arms screaming. With Rex barking madly, he hauled the man toward the side of the buoy and shoved him against the ladder. "Climb!" he yelled. Haskins clung to the rungs, gasping. "Why'd you—" "Because I'm not you," Michael snapped. As he steadied Haskins, something clicked in his mind. The phrase from the notebook, "Turns only when the lake breathes." The wind shifted, blowing hard from the east, forcing a deep swell beneath the buoy. It rose and fell like an inhalation. Michael tried the key again, and this time it turned smoothly. The buoy shuddered. A hollow clang echoed through the metal, followed by the sound of a latch releasing. A small panel opened on its side. Inside, sealed in a waterproof casing, was a metal strongbox no larger than a toolbox. He pulled it free and stuffed it into his bag. By the time he turned back, the motorboat had drifted dangerously close to the rocks. Cal was shouting, trying to regain control. Haskins, still shaking, looked at Michael, then at the storm. "We're getting out of here," he muttered. Michael nodded wordlessly. The storm raged for another hour, but somehow, Michael and Rex made it back to the houseboat. The sky was a violent quilt of lightning and shadow. He tied the rowboat tightly to the dock, hands raw and trembling. Inside, soaked to the bone, he opened the strongbox on the table. Rex sat close, dripping but alert. Inside were several brittle documents, wrapped in waxed cloth, a set of property deeds and a second map, this one older, drawn in ink that had faded to brown. The map showed Cedar Bay again, but this time, a large red X sat directly over the spot where the houseboat now floated. Michael stared at it, heart pounding. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. Rex whined softly, resting his head on Michael's knee. Outside, thunder rumbled one last time, fading into the distance. The storm had passed, but something told Michael the real trouble was only beginning. Chapter 4. The Heart Room of the Floating House. The morning after the storm carried a strange kind of stillness. Cedar Bay lay calm again, its waters smooth as glass, but the air held that clean scent that follows great turmoil: rain, metal, and pine. Michael Reed stood on the deck, shoulders stiff, watching a thin mist drift across the surface. His hands were raw from the night before, blistered and swollen from pulling ropes and saving men who would have left him to drown. Rex sat beside him, ears flicking at the sound of distant gulls. The dog's fur was still damp in places, and his gaze never left the water. He was a creature of instinct, and that instinct told him something still lingered beneath the calm. Michael carried the small strongbox inside. The documents from the buoy were spread across the table now, yellowed papers stamped with government seals, faded ink that smelled faintly of mildew. One was a deed transferring ownership of several parcels of land around the lake to Harold Reed, signed and dated nearly 80 years ago. Another looked like an official survey of the bay itself, but it was the handwritten note tucked between them that caught Michael's attention. If the lake's heart still beats, so too does its truth. Beneath the line was a small hand-drawn arrow pointing downward, directly beneath the floor plan of the houseboat itself. He frowned. "The heart of the water," he murmured. "It's not just the lake, it's this boat." Rex gave a low, curious bark, tail wagging once. Michael knelt beside him, scratching behind his ear. "You're right, boy. Time to see what the old man was hiding." He pulled up the lantern and descended the narrow stairs to the engine compartment. The space smelled of oil and iron. The old boiler sat in the center, a black, rust-specked cylinder the size of a small car. Its pipes ran like arteries through the walls. Dust floated in the weak light like drifting ash. Michael had worked around machinery most of his life, and he could tell this boiler hadn't run in decades. Still, something about it looked deliberate. There were bolts that didn't match, fresh scratches along one seam. He ran his hand across the metal, feeling for inconsistencies, until his fingers brushed a thin line of soot that seemed too straight to be natural. "You old fox," he whispered, almost smiling. He fetched his wrench from the toolbox and began loosening bolts, one by one. The sound echoed through the cabin, sharp and metallic. Rex paced near the door, ears twitching, tail stiff. Finally, the plate came free. Behind it was a hollow cavity filled with darkness. Michael shone the lantern inside and froze. There, wrapped carefully in oilcloth and stacked like sacred relics, were bundles of war bonds, letters tied with red ribbon, and a metal tube containing rolled parchment. He reached for the letters first. The top one was addressed to Margaret Hollis, written in a delicate script. He unfolded the page. "My dearest Maggie," it began, "if ever they find this, I hope they see not the greed of men, but the love that built this home. I could not have stayed on the lake without your kindness, nor could I leave it without leaving something good behind." Michael leaned back, exhaling softly. Margaret Hollis, he knew that name. She had owned Hollis Marina, the small dockside inn that had long since been bought and demolished for Dalton's development. She'd been widowed young, he remembered the townsfolk saying, but she kept the marina running until her death. His uncle's letters continued, each one full of quiet affection and gratitude. They weren't the words of a man hiding treasure. They were the words of a man trying to preserve something pure from the rot of ambition. Inside the metal tube was a legal document, notarized and signed. It confirmed the Reed family's ownership of the entire southern shore of Cedar Bay, including the marina site, land Dalton's company had been claiming as theirs. Michael felt a rush of disbelief. This changes everything. At that moment, Rex's head shot up, his body tense. A low growl rumbled from his chest. The dog darted toward the narrow stairway, barking once, deep and loud. Michael froze, the lantern trembling in his hand. He quickly stuffed the documents and letters into his bag, covering the opening in the boiler again. From above came the faint creak of the deck boards. Someone was walking outside. Then a second voice, low and urgent. "You sure he's here?" Michael recognized the tone. It was Cal Parker. The younger man's voice carried a nervous tremor, less arrogance now, more fear. "Dalton wants the papers tonight," he whispered. "If he really found something in that buoy, it's our last shot." Another voice, gravelly and older, answered. Earl Morton, a local dock worker and part-time smuggler known for his scarred cheek and glass eye. He was a wiry man in his late 50s, with a limp from a long-ago accident. Earl was the kind who would sell anyone's secret if the price was right. "Then we move quick," he said. "No noise, no mess." Rex barked again, loud and fierce this time. The footsteps quickened. Michael whispered, "Stay," and reached for the emergency flare gun mounted near the stair. The moment the door burst open, Rex lunged, knocking Earl off balance. The man cursed, swinging wildly. Michael fired the flare through the open hatch. It streaked into the night sky, bursting red over the bay like a wound opening in the dark. The commotion startled Cal, who stumbled backward toward the dock. "Earl, we gotta go," he shouted. But Earl was already pinned by Rex, struggling to protect his arm from the dog's snapping jaws. "Call him off," Earl yelled. "He'll tear me apart." Michael's voice was steady but cold. "You came here to do that yourself." Within minutes, the flare brought the attention of a nearby patrol boat. The distant hum of its engine grew louder until blue lights flashed against the water. Cal dropped his crowbar and lifted his hands. "We weren't gonna hurt him," he stammered, rain glinting on his pale face. "Dalton just wanted the papers." The officers climbed aboard, securing both men. One of them, the taller officer, turned and gave Michael a small nod. His nameplate read, Officer Haskins, Roy Haskins, the same man Michael had saved from drowning. His face was different now, less defiant, more human. He lowered his gaze. "I told them not to mess with you," he said quietly. "Guess I owed you that much." Michael simply nodded, too tired for words. Haskins gestured to the others. "Let's get these two out of here." When the noise faded and the lights disappeared down the bay, the houseboat fell silent again. The air smelled of smoke from the flare and wet wood. Michael leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Rex trotted over and pressed his head against Michael's leg. "Good boy," Michael whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Later, Evelyn arrived in her raincoat, face pale with worry. "I saw the flare," she said, stepping inside. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her hands shaking. "I thought—" She stopped when she saw him standing there, alive, exhausted but smiling faintly. Without thinking, she took his hand. "It's over," he said softly. She nodded, tears mixing with the rain. Somewhere in the corner, the old radio crackled to life, playing a faint tune from decades past, a waltz that sounded like it belonged to another world. Evelyn smiled through the tears. "Dance with me, old man," she whispered. Michael hesitated, then placed his hand on her waist. They moved slowly, awkwardly, surrounded by the smell of oil and wood, and something warm that had no name. Outside, the flare's smoke drifted into the stars, and for a moment, the whole lake seemed to breathe again, calm, forgiving. Chapter 5. The water opens. The heart opens. Spring came slowly to Cedar Bay, melting winter's last grip on the wooden docks and pushing tender green shoots through the cracks in the pier. The lake, once silver and moody, now shimmered under a pale morning sun like liquid glass. Seagulls wheeled above the water, and the air was full of the scent of sawdust, coffee, and hope. Michael Reed stood on the deck of his restored houseboat, no longer a relic of the past, but a living workshop, watching the morning unfold. His hands were calloused and steady, and for once, they were building something not just to survive, but to give. It had been 3 months since the night of the break-in. The local authorities, with Officer Haskins's testimony and the original deeds Michael had unearthed, had put a swift end to Mr. Dalton's marina project. The man himself, prideful and polished even in defeat, had left town quietly, his empire shrinking behind him. Word was that he had moved south, chasing another fortune. For Michael, the victory wasn't triumph. It was relief, the kind that settles deep in the bones. He had sold a few of the war bonds his uncle had hidden away, using the funds not for luxury, but for purpose. The old houseboat had become the Reed Workshop, a small training dock where retired laborers, mechanics, and veterans came to learn and work. The building buzzed with the comforting rhythm of hammers, saws, and laughter. The air smelled of varnish and baked bread from the diner Evelyn still ran down the road. That morning, a new face stepped aboard, a man in his late 30s with sunburned skin and sharp blue eyes shadowed by regret. Cal Parker, once Dalton's hired hand, now wore plain work clothes and a nervous smile. His hair had grown out and his hands trembled slightly as he held a worn cap. "Heard you were taking in workers," he said quietly. "Didn't figure you'd want me after what happened." Michael studied him. Cal had lost the slick confidence he'd once worn like armor. Now he looked smaller, not in size but in spirit, a man humbled by his own choices. "You pulled Haskins out of the water after I saved him," Michael said finally. "That counts for something." Cal looked up, surprised. "You mean it?" Michael nodded. "Everyone deserves another try. Grab a hammer." Rex barked approvingly from where he lay near the doorway, his fur glistening in the light. The German Shepherd had become a kind of local celebrity, calm, noble, always watchful. He wore a new collar now, polished brass shining on his chest. Inside the workshop, a framed certificate hung proudly. Cedar Bay Community Friend, awarded to Rex Reed, 2025. That day had been one of laughter and applause. Mayor Linda Pratt, a stocky woman in her 60s with silver curls and an easy laugh, had presented the medal herself. "This dog's got more sense than most of the men I've met," she'd declared, to everyone's delight. The Cedar Bay Gazette had published an article titled, "Hero Dog Still Demands Pie Crusts from Diner Owner." The photograph beneath showed Rex sitting beside Evelyn Brooks, muzzle resting on the counter as she pretended to shield her fresh-baked apple pie. Now, Evelyn herself appeared on the dock, carrying a picnic basket. She was wearing a light blue dress under her work apron, her auburn hair tied back loosely. Age had traced faint lines around her mouth, but her smile remained radiant and unhurried, the kind that softened whatever world it entered. "You missed breakfast," she said, setting the basket down. "So, I brought lunch early." Michael wiped his hands and came over. "You always know when I'm hungry." "I always know when you forget to eat," she countered, handing him a sandwich wrapped neatly in wax paper. He took it, eyes glinting with quiet affection. "You should run the government. You already control half the town's stomachs." Evelyn laughed, brushing sawdust from his shoulder. "And you, Mr. Reed, control all the noise." Rex barked once, tail thumping as though agreeing with her. She bent to scratch his ears. "And you, sir, are the only one here who knows how to behave." The afternoon sun poured golden light through the windows. Cal and two older veterans, Henry Hank Lawson and Eddie Romero, were planting planks at the far end of the room. Hank, in his late 60s, was a retired machinist with a thick white beard and a habit of humming hymns while he worked. Eddie, short and round, had once been a Navy cook. He now treated every plank like a recipe that needed seasoning and care. Their banter filled the space like music. "Hand me that chisel, Hank," Eddie called, "before I start carving with my teeth." "You'd just chew it crooked," Hank shot back. Michael smiled faintly as he watched them. The room had become something more than a workshop. It was a refuge, a place for men who had carried too much silence to finally talk, to rebuild not just wood, but dignity. Later that evening, as twilight spread soft colors across the water, Michael stood outside the houseboat, watching the sun dissolve into the lake. The reflection shimmered like melted copper. Evelyn came to stand beside him, her hand brushing his. Neither spoke for a long while. "You know," she said finally, "when I first saw that broken-down houseboat, I thought you were out of your mind." "I was," he said with a grin. "Still am." She smiled, her voice soft. "It suits you better now. You gave it a new heart." He looked at her, and for a moment he saw everything, the storm, the loneliness, the years of labor, and realized all of it had led him here. He reached for her hand, rough against soft, and held it. Inside, Rex let out a bark as if to announce something important. The workshop door opened and Hank poked his head out. "Hey, boss. Eddie says we got enough left to build. Another dock section if the weather holds," Michael called back. "Then let's build it. Tomorrow." The old man grinned and ducked inside again. Evelyn leaned her head on Michael's shoulder. "You'll never stop working, will you?" He chuckled. "Guess not. Some people build with money, others with time. I just happen to have a lot more of the second one." The lake rippled softly, the world fading into the hush of early night. Lanterns flickered to life one by one along the docks, golden halos reflected in the water. From the workshop came the faint sound of laughter, the scrape of tools, the rhythm of a life rebuilt. Michael looked out across the lake, the same lake that had once tried to swallow him whole, and felt only gratitude. He finally understood what his uncle's words had meant. The heart of the water was not a secret place beneath the waves, but the people who lived beside it, who learned to listen to it. As night deepened, the floating house glowed warmly in the dark. Evelyn poured coffee into 2 mugs, and they sat together on the steps, Rex curled at their feet. Across the water, the reflection of the house trembled in the current, steady and alive. Michael smiled faintly. "You know, for years I thought life was about holding on to what you had. Turns out, it's about what you give away." Evelyn looked at him, her eyes shining. "And what did you give away, Michael?" He looked at her hand in his, at Rex dozing between them, at the faint glow of the town lights across the bay. "Everything that didn't matter," he said simply. From somewhere behind them, Hank began playing an old harmonica tune, soft and sweet. The melody drifted over the water, joined by laughter and the faint bark of Rex, who stirred as if to sing along. And for the first time in a long, long while, Michael Reed felt at peace. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles wrapped in light or thunder. He sends them quietly, hidden in the everyday. A loyal dog, a stranger's kindness, a broken boat that becomes a home again. Michael's story reminds us that even when we lose everything, the Lord is still working beneath the surface, shaping our pain into purpose. Every sunrise over Cedar Bay was more than just morning light. It was grace, the kind that whispers, "You're not forgotten. Keep going." So, tonight, if you feel lost, if your own boat seems too heavy to steer, remember Michael's journey, and know that God still calms the waters. He still opens hearts, just as he opened his. May God bless you and guide your hands, your homes, and your hearts. If this story touched you, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Comment below your thoughts or your own story of faith. Subscribe to our channel for more stories where love, courage, and God's grace still move quietly through everyday lives.